The lowly penny. Not actually a penny at all, but a cent. Great Britain produced pennies that circulated widely in colonial America, and when the US released coins of a similar color and size, people continued using the name. Legally, however, they're known as cents. Name aside, these coins have a rich and fascinating history as one of the first coins produced at the US Mint. The creation of a mint was authorized in 1792, and the first coins were produced for circulation the following year. 1793 saw 3 different cent designs, starting with the chain cent, minted in February and March. It's believed that Henry Voigt designed and engraved this first iteration, and while he may have been the most qualified person to be found, he did not have the necessary skills for engraving intricate designs. On the obverse was a depiction of Lady Liberty, her flowing hair intended to represent freedom. The reverse included a chain of 15 links circling the denomination, meant to represent unity of the 15 states. The denomination was spelled out as well as represented in a fraction. Dies were engraved by hand, leading to small differences between each one. The very first reverse die used has been identified as the chain-a-Mary variety. It appears as though Voigt estimated the spacing incorrectly and ran out of room to spell out America. When released, the coins were not well received. The public felt that Lady Liberty looked disheveled and crazy, and the chain was more often associated with slavery than unity. Hoping to address some of the complaints, a new design was minted from April to July of 1793, known as the Wreath cent. The main change was a new reverse, with the denomination encircled by a wreath instead of a chain. These also saw the introduction of a beaded border and a small leafy sprig beneath Liberty's bust. These were also engraved by Henry Voigt, and nothing was done to address the crazed portrait of Lady Liberty. The rarest issue is known as the strawberry leaf variety, which features a different leafy sprig on the obverse. Only 4 are known to exist, the finest of which is graded fine 12. In the summer of 1793, the Mint hired Joseph Wright. He was asked to create device punches for copper coins, which meant another redesign of the cent. He streamlined Lady Liberty's hair a bit and added a Phrygian cap, creating what are known as Liberty Cap cents. There are quite a few interesting variations, like the 1794 starred reverse, which has 94 tiny stars around the border. The most valuable is the 1795 reeded edge, which made history in 2009 as the first large cent to sell for over $1 million at auction. The much-maligned flowing hair Liberty was retired mid-1796 and replaced by the draped bust cent. Designed by Robert Scott, this iteration of Liberty had much smoother hair, although the reverse saw little change. The design lasted through 1807. A logo punch may have been used for the head, but the dies were still largely punched by hand, and there were many unintentional varieties in the series. The most dramatic is the 1801 3 errors, in which one stem is missing, the U in United is a U punched over an inverted U, and the 1/100 fraction instead reads 1/3 zeros. Just 12 years after its release, the draped bust cent was replaced by the classic head, designed by John Reich. The obverse featured a bust of Liberty modified from the capped bust series, and the reverse remained largely the same, though the fraction was removed. Unlike the previous series, these have no dramatic varieties or key dates. That said, the average mintage is lower than that of common draped bust cents. The mint ran out of copper blanks early in 1815 due to a shortage caused by the War of 1812, which halted the production of cents. When production resumed later that year, they featured a new design and were dated 1816. As a result, no cents were produced with the 1815 date. The Coronet head cent was designed by Robert Scott. The obverse featured a new bust of Lady Liberty, now with her hair partially in a bun, and the reverse was largely untouched. Minted from 1816 to 1839, the Coronet head cents are known as the middle dates, and a date set is much easier to assemble than earlier designs. The most interesting variety occurred in 1817. Some have the normal 13 stars, while some have 15. Early silver coins added stars as new states joined the Union, but there were 18 states by 1817. The engraver simply punched the stars too close together and had to add in 2 extra to fill the space. The final large cent design, the braided hair cent, was released in 1839. Engraved by Christian Gobrecht, the third chief engraver, the bust of Lady Liberty is very similar to the Coronet head. The most obvious difference is the shape of the hair at the back of her head, as well as a change in overall head shape. The name, however, comes from the hair between her ear and forehead being braided, which can be difficult to see on well-worn pieces. Die-making techniques had evolved enough that any differences between dies are almost microscopic, with a few exceptions. For example, an 1851/81 overdate was created when the 18 in the date was originally punched upside down, then corrected. This series was the end of the large cents. They were generally unpopular by the 1840s, and by 1851, they cost more than the face value to produce. A small cent was proposed back in 1837 by Dr. Louis Feuchtwanger, a dentist. He produced some to prove that they would work, but it took almost 20 years for the mint to get on board. James Longacre, the fourth chief engraver, is credited with the design for the Flying Eagle cent. However, both sides came almost directly from other coins. The obverse was first seen on the Gobrecht dollars in the 1830s, and the reverse came from $1 and $3 gold pieces introduced a few years earlier. These were the first cents produced in a copper-nickel alloy. Roughly 1,500 pattern coins were produced in 1856, and circulation strikes were officially released in 1857. The small coins proved to be very popular with the public, and the Philadelphia Mint set up booths on their lawn to sell them. However, the design proved difficult to strike, and there's usually a weakness on the tail feathers. It's believed that this difficulty led to the introduction of the Indian head cent in 1859. Also designed by Longacre, the obverse once again depicted Lady Liberty, but now in an Indian headdress. The reverse saw a slightly modified version of the wreath, and the composition stayed the same. Referred to as white cents for their color, they competed with thinner, lighter Civil War tokens which circulated at the same time. This was ultimately a factor in the composition change of 1864, when cents were once again made primarily of copper. The last true redesign of the cent obverse occurred in 1909, when Victor David Brenner's wheat cent was released in honor of the centennial of Lincoln's birth. The obverse featured the bust of Lincoln, which was groundbreaking at the time. No real person had ever been depicted on a circulating U.S. coin, and featuring Lincoln was a historic decision. The reverse saw its first true overhaul in over 100 years, with 2 ears of wheat replacing the wreath. Wheat cents were highly popular, but also highly controversial. Brenner's initials, VDB, were placed on the reverse of the coin, and the public felt this was highly inappropriate and called for them to be removed, creating the 1909 VDB varieties. The 1909 SVDB is now one of the most famous key dates in existence. His initials were restored in 1918 on the bottom of Lincoln's bust, where they remain today. The wheat reverse was replaced in 1959 with the Lincoln Memorial, designed by Frank Gasparo, which ran for 50 years. In 1982, the composition was changed from 95% copper to copper-plated zinc. In 2009, in honor of the 200th anniversary of Lincoln's birth, a 4-coin set of commemorative designs were released, and a new shield reverse was introduced in 2010, which remains today. However, cents once again cost more than their face value to produce, and there's been talk of discontinuing them since the 1980s. Canada, Australia, and New Zealand have already discontinued their 1-cent coins. How much longer will ours last?